Hey, Dustin. Hey, YouTube.
Hey, hey, Michael. Hey, YouTube. I guess this is new.
Yeah. So, thanks for people who are here. Throw some comments into the live chat, and with that, we'll kick it off. Dustin, welcome back to Talk Python to me.
Yeah, it's great to be back. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. It's lovely to have you back. We talked about PyPA and the Python Packaging Authority. We talked about PyPI and all these things previously, and we're back to talk about them some more with a particular focus on security.
Yeah, which is like kind of my new focus on my day to day, my like job hat, my PSF hat, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's fantastic when the job that you're paid to do like lines up with these other things, right? You can kind of learn on the job, and then it really applies quickly. So,
Yeah,
maybe let's just start there. You're at Google working on security
yeah,
there. Maybe tell us about what you're up to and how it ties together.
yeah. So I think last time we talked, I was working for Google Cloud as a dev advocate, and so that was a lot of like, I think people mostly know me from that, a lot of conference talks and things like that. But since then, I've switched to a brand new team at Google. That's
Mm-hmm.
I'm really excited about. And I think it's just really exciting in general. We're an open source security team, so and we don't work just like on Google's open source, libraries or whatever, but we just generally broadly work on open source security across the entire open source ecosystem, and not just the Python ecosystem, but like every open source ecosystem. So we have our hand in like a lot of pots, and there's like I think you're probably aware there's like this incredible wave of like focus on software security, but also open source software security. And so we're kind of riding that
Absolutely.
wave a little bit, but yeah, it's a dream team. Everyone I work with is like super talented. We're working on some really interesting new security stuff, and yeah, really love it.
I bet it's very exciting, and you also have a chance to make a big impact, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, I've been working like kind of tangentially on software security ever since I started working on PyPI, and I've like cared about it for a long time. But it's like really, I think it's validating to sort of see that like, oh, now everyone kind of gets it. Like everyone's like, oh, this is a thing we need to focus and make better. So it's cool to be there and be like ready to do it, and have the tools to like make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a lot of resources behind you through Google and the team and so on.
Absolutely, like an
Yeah.
incredible amount of resources. Yeah, it's so
I
nice.
can, yeah, like most people probably don't fully appreciate it, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that is fantastic. The other thing that you're doing is working as the director of the PSF, right?
Well, not the director. So the PSF has a board of directors. So I call myself
I see.
one of the directors of the PSF.
Right, got it. Oh, got it. So yeah,
Yeah.
tell us about your
So
role at PSF.
yeah. So I joined the board. I think it was about 2 years ago because we just had an election, and so we sit for 3-year terms. So I've got another year left before I have to run again. But yeah, it's been really nice to sort of like work on the PSF from the inside and do some community stuff. It's been a really weird time to join the board as well. Like PSF, it was like right at the start of the pandemic, and like the PSF derives most of its income from events like PyCon, like a lot of its income. And that was always sort of like identified as like kind of an existential threat to the PSF, but
Hmm.
it like very much became a reality very quickly. And so there was a lot of work done before I joined, and like sort of like after I joined as well, to adapt to that. And I think PSF did an amazing job. Like we actually did really well, partly and thanks to like all of our sponsors and donors that like still continued to step it up, even though we weren't doing an in-person PyCon. We did a bunch of virtual PyCons. They went pretty well. Not as quite as fun for me. I like to see folks in person, but yeah, we I think made it through the other side amazingly, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's been great. We got a really great board now. We just brought on a couple new folks as well, and I'm really excited to see what we're going to do for the next couple of years.
I don't know that people fully appreciate how important PyCon is to the existence and financial well-being of the PSF. Maybe elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, I think the statistic, maybe at its peak, PyCon's revenue was about 85% of the operating budget of the PSF. So like almost all of the money that the PSF needs to like run and operate, which means pay staff, pay for infrastructure, all that kind of stuff, came from ticket sales for PyCon. And that also
And
included
sponsorship money and things like that,
yeah,
right?
yeah. It's a little gray because like there are sponsors and they like both sponsor PyCon and sponsor the PSF, and it's like that money sort of just gets used by the PSF. But yeah, I mean, a lot of that sponsorship was really tied to the in-person event. And so one thing we've done recently is like, if you're not a PSF sponsor, you should go psf.org/sponsor. And there's kind of like a new menu for sponsorship. And we sort of adapted it in a way that's like not exactly focused. Like you don't have to show up to PyCon to be a PSF sponsor, and still you'll get a lot of benefit from it, including supporting things like PyPI and other infrastructure projects.
There's a bit of it seems like a bit of a wave of large companies coming in and properly sponsoring the PSF. And I don't know if this is in reaction to what happened with PyCon and COVID, or it just happens to be the timing and the growth, and especially the growth of Python in a more business corporate sense.
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. One is that like PSF very much needs the support, right? And I think that's made obvious to the organizations that use Python and our infrastructure like PyPI. The other thing is I think a lot of organizations are taking open source as like a dependency a lot more seriously. So making sure that they're like in some way contributing or, providing support for the infrastructure tools, software that they use. I think the other thing that I want to call out here is like the PSF staff is incredible. They've done an amazing job about making it really an attractive thing to be a sponsor of the PSF, and also like following through on our commitments and to or organizations' commitments to us, our commitments to them, that kind of thing, and like finding new and interesting ways to like get funding as well, right? So like we started doing an interesting thing a couple of years ago where we started applying for grants for like work on PyPI. And I think that's actually our first podcast was about like some funded work that I got hired to do as a contractor. And then we kind of like repeated that, and we like brought in a ton of money to fund like really big stuff that like a volunteer would never get done in a year of weekends, right? Like it's just never going to happen that a volunteer is going to sit down and have the time to do this. So it's been really successful in terms of like shipping stuff that users need. That's like big, like large scale stuff.
Yeah, it seems a little bit like in the past, but when you go to pypi.org, this is still kind of shiny new, right? It got rewritten a couple of years ago and polished up and made a lot more modern, right?
Yeah. I think 2018 we launched this, and so it hasn't changed really, visually much since then. A lot of new features and development, and like the whole point behind the rewrite was to make it a lot easier to build on top of. PyPI was like ancient, essentially. It predated everything on PyPI. So like it was kind of wacky, but it's super modern now, which is cool. And we have like, it's like more sustainable now as well, right? Like we have better like commitments from our in-kind donors for infrastructure. Shout out to like Fastly that pays our entire infrastructure bill and is like an amazing sponsor of PyPI. But also just like we have, we had just hired an infrastructure engineer to work on PyPI, which is super exciting, and PyPI and other PSF infrastructure as well. And it's just like it's a little more sustainable than it used to be. Like we have a better core of volunteers, moderators, all that kind of stuff.
We talked back in 2018. I think maybe you and Donald Stuffed. I don't remember if you all were on together. Those were two separate shows, but you were both involved. And one of the challenges was PyPI, the web app, was so bespoke and sort of its own tangled mess that people would want to contribute, and they'd be like, you know what, now that I see this, maybe not so much, right? And it sounds like it's in a better place. We have some PEPs that we're going to talk about extending some of its functionality and those sorts of things, which is probably a spin-off of just making it easier to work with.
Yeah, I mean, we did a full stack rewrite for our reasons, because it's easier to maintain for us. It's easier to contribute for other users, easier to propose new changes. And I think like maybe like the undertone for this entire interview is like, there needs to be progress, right? Like we can't just like get to a point where it's just that's it. That's good. Like there's just going to be, it's a constantly shifting landscape. So like, if we, the PSF, we PyPI want to continue to be successful and popular, and like Python is doing amazing right now, we have to adapt to that to some extent.
Yeah, it's not the same world it was built for when it first came out, and also this 393,000 packages is probably not something that was expected when this whole idea was put together.
Yeah, I mean it's scaled like impressively well, I think, over the years, like almost 4 million individual releases, like 6 million individual artifacts. Like that's a lot. That's a lot of stuff.
That is a I've just noticed there is some serious construction below me that I did not think was going to be very loud. I just for a moment I think so. If you're listening live, I apologize. We'll edit this out, but yeah. Anyway, so if I go quiet for just a second, just that's because of a saw or something. Anyway, let's talk just a bit about the whole infrastructure side, not the tech or anything. We've covered that before, and it was really interesting, but just how much data and expense there is to run this thing.
Yeah, so I wrote a blog post sometime last year, and it was going to be essentially a 5-year update from a previous post that Donald, who's one of the other PyPI maintainers, had written about just like what it takes to power PyPI, and it has some statistics in it that are at this point out of date. But like, yeah, we serve like almost, I think at this point, over 2 billion requests a day. We transfer like more than 60 terabytes from pypi.org, and that doesn't include files. So when we serve the actual files, actual distributions, that's like almost 1,000 terabytes a day, like per day. That's a lot. It's like
1,000 terabytes.
Yeah, so if we had to pay like retail cost for our bandwidth from our CDN, so like almost like 99% of PyPI is served from CDN, it would be in the millions of dollars. Like it's a substantial infrastructure cost just to like serve the files, serve the requests. So yeah, and it's not going down. It's not plateauing either. It's definitely going up, which is good in the sense that like, yeah, we want it to be popular, but like there's sustainability questions that come with that as well as we grow, just sort of like unfettered, you know? Yeah, figuring that out.
Honestly, that kind of blows my mind. I'm just wondering, you know, what would you possibly do if you didn't have companies like Fastly really supporting?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it would be very hard to keep PyPI running if we didn't have the support of all our sponsors. And like, I think it's really important to make this distinction between PyPI and other indexes like NPM, for example, which is owned by a massive corporation and like has a whole support staff, has a whole like engineering staff. PyPI is like a couple folks and like a bunch of donated stuff, you know, and it's like on the same scale, you know, it's like and as useful as something like NPM. So yeah.
Okay, well, when I think about how PyPI and NPM and Ruby Gems, and you know, this is not to focus on like to call out Python, but just all of these. It reminds me of the early internet back when when we didn't have passwords, but when it was kind of like, oh, we don't really need encryption here. And it was from a time when things were simpler, and it feels like it's getting a little more complicated security wise and so on.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, there was a point when, you know, me as a PyPI maintainer administrator, like we never had to respond to takedowns for like malicious stuff. Like it just never happened. And now it's like my inbox is on fire because I get multiple reports a day. Yeah. I mean, it's like I think part of it is like people are trying to hit security bounties and do, you know, like research with PyPI, which is you know, not the intended use case for PyPI, but yeah, it's a lot. Like it's definitely, there's an uptick.
So yeah, there's been a lot of talk on the internet about things that might fix it, like signing packages and whatnot. But we'll talk about whether that actually has anything to offer there.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to give a quick shout out to is this the one? Now there's there's from the OpenSSF. They just gave some big donation to make PyPI a little bit better, right? So they
Yeah, well,
committed $400,000 in order to create a new role. Tell us a bit about this. What is this?
yeah, yeah. They're very excited to announce that they're planning to support us with a new role. So it hasn't
Okay, it
been,
hasn't been
contract
finalized.
hasn't
Okay,
been signed yet. No, no, like
gotcha.
OpenSSF, a fairly new organization, bunch of member organizations, including Google, Microsoft, whatever, to essentially support software security, right? And so they're just kind of getting started pretty recently, and I think their marketing team kind of outpaced the like legal team here. So we haven't signed the contract yet, but it's like I feel confident saying that like this is probably almost definitely going to happen. So yeah, they committed I think $400,000 to doing a developer in residence that's security focused. And so this is sort of like piggybacking on something that I helped start but 2 years ago at this point, which is create the CPython developer in residence. So that was started with funding from Google, and Lukas Schlanga became the CPython developer in residence. And like, I loved see this because like, I'm very happy to say Google is not the sponsor of CPython developer in residence this year. It's Facebook. And like, that's great because like, I think this is something that can be shared by all the PSF sponsors, funding it each year, that kind of thing. So in a similar way, we're going to ideally hire someone that will focus on just security for Python. That might be security for CPython, it might be security for PyPI. They also want, I think, to fund a security audit of some like critical tooling for Python ecosystem. That might be PyPI TBD. So, but yeah, this is super cool. And yeah, they've also like announced funding for some other organizations like Eclipse Foundation and others.
This is fantastic news, and it's too bad that it's not signed yet, but it sounds like it's definitely going to happen. And when it becomes official, I'll give it another shout out just to say thanks, because this is going to probably make a big difference. That's a big chunk of money to contribute to it.
Yeah, and I think similar to the CPython developer in residence role, like we're gonna do interviews and audit and hire someone for that role. So there'll be a job posting if this happens, and then I'll be definitely tweeting, sharing that, trying to get people to get interested and apply, because this is a super cool role.
Yeah, it sure is. All right, let's talk about 2FA. That's been a bit of a flashpoint, and I don't feel like it should have, but it has been. What's the story with 2FA and critical packages and PyPI?
Oh man, yeah. So yeah, Flashpoint, like kind of almost unexpected for me. Like I think I'm just so close to security space and PyPI and all that stuff that like I think the reaction was a little stronger than I think everyone expected. So yeah. So what happened?
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Well, I was gonna say, it feels to me like the reaction was, if you had set up a rule that said, hey, you can't have the letter A as your password, and everyone who has the letter A, you have to change it. It's like, it's almost like that level of requirement change to me, it feels like, and yet it just blew up, right?
Yeah. Well, let me give some background, and then like we can talk about like realistically what it means. So yeah, we made an announcement, and basically that we were going to designate some projects on PyPI as critical, and essentially we determined this based on download count, because that's kind of like, it's not a great metric, but it's kind of the best metric we have for determining like if this project was compromised, and I'll talk about like how that might happen. How many people would be affected. And it's like, if we measure the amount of times that this is getting downloaded a day, that's a pretty good proxy for like impact in terms of something being compromised.
Right.
So yeah, we made this designation, and we sort of announced that like at some point in the future, did not announce a date, did not like enforce a requirement at this point. We're going to ask those maintainers to require that 2FA is enabled for their account. And so we did that. And then we sort of paired this with an incentive. My team at Google actually funded the purchase of a bunch of Titan security keys. These are like hardware keys for two-factor authentication. that Google manufactures, but we just, essentially we give away discount codes to these maintainers of projects that have been designated as critical, and they can get not one but two for free. So if they're one of these maintainers, so yeah, we did that, and the designation was 1%. We decided the top 1% of projects would be at this point designated as critical.
Right. I feel like there was a bit of a confusion when people saw this announcement. They saw, wait a minute, you're making me adopt hardware-based 2FA because I have a PyPI package. The requirement is not that you have to use the hardware keys if you have a critical package, is it?
Nope. And like, I would love if everyone used hardware keys because I think they're generally considered to be a little bit more secure. But no, the idea is that everyone should turn on 2FA, and that's PyPI supports, TOTP, which is like what you're used to via like the free applications on a phone or other device, and security keys. So like, and security keys is pretty broad now. That doesn't just include the like USB devices, but also like you can do WebAuthn via like phones and like other physical hardware. Like it's pretty, the integration with browsers is pretty good now. So there's a lot of support.
Yeah, just like the audience out there, Michael is asking, do they need to be hardware keys or just regular auth? It's just regular auth, right? And that's why I said I don't feel like it's that big of a deal. It's like, well, you have to have a secure password, or you have to have 2FA or whatever.
Yeah. So I think the like kind of immediate reaction from some folks with like really big megaphones essentially was that this is a slippery slope. Like PyPI is asking something of its users, and we don't do that very often. Like we sort of like let users do whatever they want, and we have some sort of like baseline requirements for like how to use PyPI, but we don't like often ask people to do extra stuff. But there's a good reason why we're interested in asking people to do 2FA, and it's not because like Google has secretly conspired to like do it so that it's own open source security. Like it.
There was a whole undercurrent, a whole thread of, well, it's these big corporate companies that are adopting Python that are making us do different security to support them, and that wasn't it at all, was it?
No. I mean, so here's the main reason, right? And like that is valid, right? Like there are big corporations that consume stuff from PyPI. They would love to have more assurances about like that their projects haven't been compromised. I don't think 2FA is like exactly the right way to do that. At the end of the day, 2FA like it protects against like two kind of critical attacks that could happen on a Python package. One is just like phishing, right? Like 2FA is essentially, it completely eliminates the potential to get phished. And like, I've never seen someone get phished on PyPI. I've never heard about a phishing attack, but like PyPI is as susceptible as like a bank or anything else for phishing. Like it could happen to anybody. So that's one thing. The other thing is maybe like more specific to PyPI itself, which is what we call like domain resurrection attacks. So developers like really love their vanity domains, their personal domains, their personal email addresses. And so unlike maybe your bank, like the users on PyPI are more likely to have these like one-off domains, and those domains like expire. People forget about them. They lose access to them. They get, registered by someone else. And when that email address has the ability to reset a password on a PyPI account, an attacker can like keep an eye on your domain, watch when it expires, go and register it, do a password reset, and then take over your account and publish whatever they want. And so 2FA, in a similar way to phishing, protects against that attack as well. And
that's like, I had never really thought about that. That's almost like the SIM card,
a little bit
equivalent, right. But for email. So the SIM card problem is, I could call up, I could call up someone else's phone provider and say I lost my SIM card. Please issue me a new one, and then you start getting their SMS for like SMS authentication and stuff. This is you've taken over their domain, not maliciously. They just decided to, a credit card expired or something, and then you snatched it up, set up some MX records, and off you go. Okay.
Yeah. So like, and so again, like our ultimate goal, like PyPI's administrators, I'd love to protect all users from, attacks that could be prevented from 2FA, but it's a little bit more like, like it's actually for our own benefit, right? Those kind of attacks. So one has happened recently. The CTX package had a domain takeover and a malicious release published. And we wrote up a very long incident about it. It took a lot of our time. And we essentially like, it's not sustainable for these to happen. We don't have a support team. We can't do, manually remove these packages and
Right.
monitor things for like, we just can't handle it. So 2FA is like us, the folks that maintain PyPI, asking users like, hey, help us out a little bit. Just do this thing for us to like kind of cut down on the potential for this and make it easier for us to do things that like we actually want to do to PyPI and not just like respond to security incidents.
Right. Because there's only a couple of you. And if you're spending all your time putting out these fires, you're not adding JSON endpoints and other beneficial things.
Yeah. All sorts of stuff. Like, the more time we spend putting out fires, the less we can do like useful and interesting things to PyPI.
Yeah. So why 1% of the top packages? Why is that critical? And also, what's the designation over time?
The designation is if at any point it was in the top 1%. And I think we recompute this every day. So, projects have, since we announced this, they've moved into the 1% because it's constantly shifting. But why 1%? So that's a question that like was coming up a lot in the discussion after we made this announcement. And the like secret to the 1% is that in reality, if you were to go and figure out like, okay, how much traffic, how many downloads does this 1% of packages actually represent for PyPI? It's like over 95%. It's close to 99%. It's like most of what people are using from PyPI is in this 1%. So by saying 1%, we also essentially said like for the long tail of PyPI that people aren't using, we care a little bit less about that. We're going to cover like the majority of these, but like I said, the potential for impact if something was compromised, we sort of maximize that. And we also kind of had to minimize that 1% too, because I think another thing that folks didn't really realize about like what it takes to support 2FA is that there's an incredible maintenance burden for 2FA. Like we have to handle account recovery requests because people like they lose their phones, they lose their hardware keys. People are humans, right? And so this happens all the time. And it's expensive for us to handle this, right? We can't just say, all right, okay, great. You lost 2FA. I turned it off for your account. Go wild, because that's essentially like a perfect way to circumvent 2FA. Instead, we have to do this like very manual process where we like verify other identities, emails. Like if you have a GitHub associated, we ask you to do something on GitHub to like prove that you own that account. And even then, it's really not perfect. Like there is potential for someone to be compromised who did have 2FA enabled by someone who could take over this account or that account and then like pretend like they need an account recovery. But yeah, this is a huge maintenance burden. So like we actually like can barely handle account recovery requests right now. And I'm a little wary of like how many we're going to get now that folks have started really turning on 2FA. But we're like,
maybe that's partly why 1% and not 100%, right?
Oh yeah, like there's just zero chance we could handle 100% of like everyone on PyPI with 2FA enabled. Like we just couldn't handle it. I would love that. Like that would be great. But unfortunately, like the amount of people losing their stuff and having to come to us for resets is the burden is really high.
Sure. For me, I used Authy for my 2FA, which syncs across devices. So at least if I lose one, I can get it back.
Yeah. And like Google Authenticator works really well for TOTP as well. And I think you can like download the codes or store them externally as well. So if you lose your phone, you can, regain access to those TOTP codes as well. And there's a bunch, like there's also like emulated TOTP stuff where you can like run it on your laptop, and it's not like maybe not technically true factor, but like a lot of people use that because it's more convenient.
Yeah, it's way better than nothing.
It's all better than nothing. Exactly.
Let's talk about James Bennett and opinions. You called out this article, and I also read this. I think this is really good. What are some of your takeaways here?
Yeah, James absolutely nailed the response here, and actually, like, when we got a lot of feedback, and I'm not going to say that it was bad feedback. It was maybe somewhat uninformed feedback, or it was somewhat sensational feedback, but we got a lot of feedback after this, and some of it was totally valid. Like, at the end of the day, we are asking users to take a little more effort, and some people, they don't want to do that. I like none of the PyPI administrators actually like explicitly responded to a lot of this. I think we were all like a little bit depressed about how upset some people were about a 2FA requirement that didn't even exist yet. But James, like really, shout out to James, because I read this and I was like, I really could not have written it better than he did. yeah, he
Yeah,
he
there's a
really
lot
called out.
there, and it's I think it's very well thought. Yeah, thought out. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, shout out to James. Yeah, I think, there was kind of like two arguments that he was making, which is that like, a lot of people were concerned this would be a slippery slope. And I think I don't really foresee IPA making too many more mandates about stuff like this, not because of the feedback, but because, like we're never going to, I don't think we're ever going to mandate signing, for example. Like that's always going to be the option of the maintainer. But, things like 2FA for certain high profile stuff, like, yeah, it really helps out. It helps PyPI continue to exist, right? Like that's actually the motivation here.
Well, and I definitely want to echo the message that you said about the overhead.
Yeah,
Like you
and
have to deal. The people who would otherwise be constructively working on this have to deal with these problems.
yeah, every day. I mean, it's like I don't get paid to do it. I do it out of love, but yeah, it becomes larger and larger every day, and yeah, we're keeping our head above water right now. But yeah, there's plans
Yeah.
also to make that better. But yeah.
How much do you think the reaction, I'll put it out there, what I think the overreaction was of how much do you think that was perceived as it's got to be a hardware key versus it's just straight 2FA? Do you think people really
Yeah,
rejected it being 2FA, or did it seem like a bigger burden than just adding it to your Google Authenticator?
yeah, I think so. Like, if I were to say that whether we made some sort of failure here when we announced it, I would say like we didn't message this super well, right? And that's because I'm a software engineer. I'm not a marketer, or I'm an okay communicator. And same is true for the rest of us. We don't have copywriters, anything like that. We don't have a PR team. So yeah, there was some stuff that people kind of missed, and I think one of the things was missed was like the mandate doesn't exist right now. We're just talking about enforcing it in the future. The other was like what is actually being required of you today, which for most folks it was nothing. It was like if you want to get a pair of free security keys, you have to do this today. And by the
I'm
way,
sure you all
those are
saw this as a
still available.
positive, like, hey, we got this cool thing for people that they can get if they want,
Yeah.
or they just do 2FA. But like people are like, what is this? Yeah, and you're saying there's still some available for folks who want to get it, right?
Yeah, so through October 1st. So yeah, if you this is my call out at the end as well, but yeah, if you go to pypi.org/security-key-giveaway, you can check if you're a critical maintainer, and you can get a key, get a pair of keys actually. Yeah. So the pair of keys thing also, people weren't really sure why we were doing that, but the main reason is to help you not lose both of them, like lose all access. So if you have two keys and you've used both of them, you have some redundancy.
You can stick it in the garage or stick it somewhere else, hand it to a friend, keep it
Bury
in
it
your
in your backyard. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There was, and I guess part of the reason this is so much in the public awareness is because of this project called Atomic Rights.
Yes.
Want to give us all the rundown of why we're talking about this package? Let me just give people a really quick background. Atomic Rights is a package that lets you, within a with block, like you would do open file, but instead you say atomic write, and it will write to a temporary file and then only commit those changes to the real file, like at the very end, all in one shot. Pretty useful, not super hard to do your own version of, with a couple of built-in things in Python,
Well, yeah,
like files and what, but still.
It's kind of no longer necessary for modern Python, is my understanding. Like this is a couple of lines of like modern Python, and you don't have to worry about it. But it used to be, something that you would use maybe.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So how does this relate to 2FA? That has nothing to do with 2FA, does it?
Well, there's this thing that happens all the time, right? Like, so PyPI has this policy that everything on PyPI is essentially immutable. And that means that like individual files, file names, which include a project name, a version, and like a distribution type, those are immutable. So if you upload something to PyPI that is like a source distribution for some version or whatever, you publish that, it's there. You can't overwrite it, right? So you can't surreptitiously like change what that points to. So like anyone installing that is always going to get the same thing, same SHA, everything. But that also means like if you want to delete something, you delete it and it's gone forever. You can't come back and overwrite it with something else. And so, and I don't encourage people to delete stuff from PyPI generally, because, you're almost definitely going to break somebody. There's better methods for, kind of marking something as not useful and telling pip to not install it. And that's our yanking, which is a whole pep into itself. But Yeah, so this thing happens all the time though. Like we have a huge warning banner, big red button, like everything telling you if you're going to delete this thing, you're not going to be able to get it back. And so what happened here is like this maintainer didn't want to comply with 2FA. Their project was marked as critical because a lot of people were using it. Like a lot of people were using it still, and they thought that it would be a cool. They thought they'd discovered a cool hack where if they deleted it and then recreated it later, that the mandate would no longer apply. And like that was kind of true because, like I said, our computation for critical projects runs once a day. So when they brought it back, like it didn't have that flag. Within 24 hours, that flag was added back to the project essentially. But for a brief period of time, yeah, it was not marked as critical. But what happened was, all these versions went away, and like a lot of people, I think, were depending on them, like actual users of this project. And so, yeah, like there's a long discussion happening now about whether like it should even be possible to delete stuff from PyPI, and there's good arguments on both sides of the coin, right?
Yeah, well, that was one of my first thoughts. Is like, wait, you can delete the releases? I knew they were immutable. You can't update them, but deleting. So what's the trade-off there? Why can you delete them now, and maybe why wouldn't you in the future?
Well, I mean, yeah, this is like the npm's left pad incident essentially. Like right now there's potential for a high profile enough. And this package wasn't super high profile, but like it was in the critical list. It was in the top 1%. There's potential for some maintainer to decide, and it's their prerogative right now, right? Like there's no guarantees that these things continue to exist on PyPI. No one's necessarily paying for this. So like, yeah, maintainer absolutely has the ability now to just wipe something super popular and necessary off the face of PyPI. And like that's the current status quo. It's not the same in a lot of other ecosystems. Some of them don't have that policy, some of them do, but yeah, so there's a bit of debate about whether that should be necessary, especially when we have stuff like yanking, which actually is like kind of a more meaningful way to remove something. Yeah.
So let's suppose somebody, Pallets org or whatever, erases Flask tomorrow.
David, don't do it.
David, please keep going, man. What is there a way to get a hold of the actual wheels and stuff as a community and put it back up under potentially a different name? Or is it just gone?
Yeah.
How seriously gone is it when it's gone?
So yeah, nothing published to PyPI is actually gone. So we don't actually, unless we're like legally required to, we don't delete any actual files off of our data store. So like the bucket that everything goes into, everything that's ever been published to PyPI is still there. And so this actually played out. It's good that we have this in a couple instances, because this is what exactly we used in this case of atomic rights. Because the maintainer was like, oh, like I made a mistake. And they were like kind of humble. They were like, yeah, okay, this was a mistake. I shouldn't have done this. And then asked us to essentially restore the project from scratch. And like, we don't really have mechanisms to do that, right? That's not something that we do often. I think I can only remember maybe once when we've done that before, maybe not even once. And we generally just don't do this. Like if you delete something, we say it's gone. Like you need to publish a new version. But in this case, like we did decide to take the time. I think it took Donald like almost an hour to do this because it's a super manual process. But yeah, the files are still there.
Something so like you don't do very often, right?
Yeah, no, like almost.
How can I even do this?
Yeah. So like the files are still there, and they're still like externally addressable too. So they're they're always going to be available. And like if something like that happened, David, don't do it. But like if something like that happened, I think folks would probably be okay. We'd find ways around it. But yeah, I mean, it's a strong argument for not allowing it to happen. And when people publish stuff to PyPI, like our TOS is essentially you give us the right to distribute this as we see fit forever. So PyPI is within its right, but there's arguments for giving maintainers the ability to do it for various reasons. Yeah.
Has there been any thoughts to putting like levels of what pip will install? For example, I'm thinking like I want to set up my pip though it will only accept things that have 2FA set up, or it will only accept things with a certain number of downloads. Like I can only pip install something with 10,000 or more downloads. So because maybe I'm trying to avoid typo squatting for very edge case things. In that general realm, have you all thought about this? Probably you
Yeah,
have.
definitely.
What
I
what are some
think
of
we
the
have it on
thoughts?
our list to talk about later, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely potential, right? There's all sorts of signals that you could potentially take into account here. TBD, like how meaningful some of them actually will be, or how much they will actually protect you. But
Sure.
yeah, people have talked about like essentially defining a policy for what they'll consume and either having that be part of PIP or something external. Yeah, it's definitely been discussed.
Okay. For example, like the web browsers, you can have no blocking, you can have block third-party cookies, you can block third-party cookies and trackers, right? And you can decide like how broken do I want my web to be versus
Yeah.
how safe do I want my web to be? I feel like there might be something like that uh,
Y-
in the PIP
Yeah,
world.
I think the reality, at least right now, is that any kind of policy like that would not be enforceable because there's
Mm.
going to be some edge case, some dependency that's super old or whatever. Like Python is not nearly as bad as an ecosystem like npm in terms of like breadth of dependencies for a given thing, right?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
maybe
Usually the
it's like
dependencies are like thicker, right? You don't
yeah,
have
right, yeah.
like 3 lines of code you're depending on. You just put that in your code.
It does exist, but yeah, generally no. But so that's sort of like, but even still, like I think you'd have a hard time saying like I'm going to only consume packages that have 2FA enabled because there's so few of them right now. If all that's the tooling and stuff for that existed.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Well, interesting. So this Atomic's Right story is everything was put back, but
Yes.
it shows unintended consequences. But
And kind of
yeah,
ironic too, actually, because like PyPI is an open source project as well, and like people were upset that we were making demands of users to do a certain thing, but like at the end of the day, someone's making demands of us to use our time in ways that we don't
yeah.
necessarily want to. So yeah,
Well, and
it's trade-offs.
again, see James Bennett's article, right? A lot of those ideas were really well spelled out
Yeah,
there.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
people forget that it's a volunteer open source project and not like run
I
by
thought
some
it was this
corporation.
conglomerate of corporate overlords. So
Shadowy
this is what I got from
government.
Reddit. What's this PyPI 2FA dashboard here? This looks pretty cool. Tell us about this
Yeah.
project. I'll link to it in
Might
the
want
show
to
notes, of course.
switch to like the top right, switch to like past 3 months or something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
You can really see the bump there. So yeah, this is a dashboard we put together essentially for us to monitor how the rollout for 2FA and security key giveaway was going. But we made it public, so like anyone can check this out. And I think we'll put link in the show notes. But yeah, the numbers are great. The one thing this isn't actually showing is how many security keys we've given away. So we've at this point, like I just checked earlier, we've given away more than 500 keys, which is awesome. And it's only a fraction of what we have to give away. So I would really like, if anyone listening wants a key and has a critical project, like go and get the keys. And then, we'll find something to do with those keys if we don't give them all away by the time they expire in October. But yeah, so a bunch of keys given away. We also, I didn't mention this, but like as part of this, we also turned on a feature that allowed any project to manually require 2FA for all their maintainers. So like anyone that just wasn't critical and wanted to opt into this, they could do that too. So I think almost 300 projects have done that. And then we're so close to hitting 30,000 users on PyPI with two-factor enabled, which is huge.
Right on.
And that's up from like 27,000 before we did the giveaway.
Cool. Well, I was one of the 27,000 before because my packages on PyPI are not super significant, but they are there. And so I definitely put 2FA on there and just have it running through,
Nice.
my phone basically.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. So people can go and see the progress here of how it's coming along.
Yeah, and how many projects we've classified as critical, right? Like how many is 1%? Well, right now it's like almost 4,000 projects, which it's not a ton, but there's a lot of maintainers of those projects.
Sure. Well, two things that are interesting. One is I think I can go to pypi.org and see 393,000 and say, well, 3,930 are probably critical, right? As that designation. But as you said, it's computed over time. So maybe there's something that was critical but is no longer, or something becomes critical, right? So this number could sort of outpace the actual number of just 1% of the total projects. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it will grow above 1% over time because, yeah, if something's been designated as critical, it just retains that designation indefinitely. And then the other
Got it.
thing that we kind of snuck in here is that like anything that's a dependency of PyPI itself is also critical. So we just figured that would
Oh,
be a good idea
interesting.
for us. So yeah, there's a couple projects that maybe wouldn't normally be included, but we include them because like we personally care about them.
Is
So
that like maybe pyramid or stuff like that, or something
I
else?
actually I don't know
Pyramid might
what
is
yeah, I don't know what the difference between
yeah,
those 2 sets is necessarily, but,
yeah,
yeah, it would be
sure.
interesting to figure out.
But anything, if there's anything that potentially wasn't, then it is because of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing that's interesting is there's 8,400 users identified as critical, even though there's 3,900 packages. So I guess because multiple people can be designated as a maintainer, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So, like, it looks like the average is about 2 maintainers per critical project, which is a little scary. I think in our reality, there's a lot that just have 1 and a lot that have a lot more, but, yeah.
Yeah, it's bimodal sort of distribution, right? Like, it's like a whole
Right,
bunch by the
exactly.
one maintainer, then these groups of people. Yeah,
Yes, yep.
interesting. Okay, this is cool. So people can check this out and see how it's going. This whole idea of critical and requiring 2FA, this NPM is also doing something like this, right? So it's not completely out of the blue.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of organizations are doing it. I think Ruby Gems said that we were working on a mandate or had proposed one as well. And yeah, NPM, they started with a pretty small cohort. It's only the top 100 projects, but they're going to expand that. And then the big one is, I think a lot of people aren't aware of this, but like GitHub announced that they are going to require 2FA for anyone that contributes code on GitHub, which is like, I guess
Yeah.
everyone that uses Git. I don't know. I don't know what the user is that doesn't contribute code on GitHub, but like, yeah, everyone's gonna have 2FA enabled, which is huge by the end of 2023. So they have some time, but
Ah,
like,
yeah.
I can't comprehend the size of the support team they must be hiring right now to satisfy that because that's like it's crazy, you know.
Yeah. Well, probably a lot of support team and a lot of automation that they're trying to get in place to, okay,
Sure.
here's what you got to do. But
Yeah, and
yeah,
like
it's
the
it's
kind of
going to be high.
the secret here is that like we have a so via the OpenSSF, it has a bunch of work groups, and we have a new one that's pretty fun for me because it's about securing software repositories. But essentially, you know, like everyone that maintains a software repository, including folks from npm, crates, Ruby Gems, like Maven Central, all that stuff, we all come and talk twice a week or once every 2 weeks, and you know, talk about this kind of stuff. So like we've been all talking about like 2FA mandates for a while now, and like kind of working on our
Okay.
plans together and sharing notes and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Fantastic. Um, yeah, I can only think that there's probably some users who just clone repos and post issues, but don't do any check-ins. They're just there to
Yeah.
just to
No, that's
save a
fair. Yeah.
copy.
Yeah.
But that's actually probably not the main use, right? Probably the main use is people contributing to their private repos or to, maybe even less so to
Yeah.
public repos.
Yeah.
Probably mostly private repos, I would guess. Okay, but yeah, that's going to be a big deal, and it also, I guess, leads us into the whole supply integrity side of things, right? Because it's one thing to say your account on PyPI has to be secured with 2FA and better security, but if somebody can just put in bad code through a very complex PR that happens to sneak, a less than where there used to be a greater than, or some weird little edge case into a PR, right? So or take over somebody's GitHub account, change the code, and they don't realize it, right?
Yeah.
That's probably more likely because there's no notification that you did your own commit in a significant way, right? So locking down GitHub will have really important knock-on effects for Python and all the other open source package locations, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of work being done here just in terms of like making your source repository more secure, making your builds, you know, if you're building artifacts on GitHub, making those more secure, you know, making your publishing method more secure. Like all of it is getting
CI,
a ton of improvement right
yeah,
now. Yeah, like
yeah.
everything.
I
Yeah.
mean, you don't want something sneaking in to mix in some code in a CI step or any of those types of things. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah. And there's
that's
just so many insertion points, right? Like
yes,
there's a lot of
exactly,
spots. Yeah.
exactly. What? So I guess what are some of the thoughts on what can be done? Like there's it used to be, this is kind of what I was going back to, like, oh, there used to be this world with no encryption and like lacks or no passwords, and now all of a sudden we need all this junk.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a little bit of that with people going, well, let's just try to abuse PyPI. Let's try to abuse NPM and sneak in what we can. And you maybe talk about some of the steps you all have taken to mitigate that, and what you think can be done. There's a lot of talk about package signing, which I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
Straight up
Well, I
signing
think
is how useful that is, but yeah, maybe let's start at like, what have you thought about?
I mean, I think the thing I want to start with is just like none of these is a panacea, right? Like, so I think one of the arguments that was raised with the two-factor stuff was just like, well, this isn't going to protect like us from a vulnerability or like a maintainer going rogue. It's like, yeah,
Right.
no, obviously not. Like, there's not one thing that's going to protect you from that. It's like there's a combination of features that are going to protect you from a combination of threat actors or vectors, and we have to use all of them if you want to like feel fully protected. So yeah, I think like we just spent a lot of time talking about 2FA, but like I said, it eliminates entire classes of attacks. So like, please turn on 2FA. Yeah, another one, like since we're talking about GitHub, an interesting one is the security hardening with OIDC. So if you've heard of OIDC, it's OpenID Connect. It's kind of built on OAuth protocol, but essentially like it allows you to give things identity. So like each individual GitHub action workflow, like each run of the workflow actually gets its own identity, and that identity is like cryptographically verifiable. So PyPI is we're working on implementing support right now, and it will exist very soon for what is essentially going to be credentialless publication from a GitHub Actions workflow.
Okay.
So that means like no password, no API token, nothing. You essentially say, okay, I trust this workflow, and it has the ability to publish directly in a secure way. It's super cool. And then like a lot of other CI providers are going to implement hopefully support for OIDC as well. So yeah, we'll hopefully see this in a bunch of places.
All right. So short-lived tokens directly from your cloud provider.
Yeah, essentially it works for like Google Cloud right now as well, and a couple other things. But yeah, it's essentially like a way to verify the identity of like a really tightly scoped thing, like a actions run, and then verify it and authenticate it and give it the permission to like do something like publish to PyPI.
All right, yeah, this looks useful. You mean handing out API keys or embedding username passwords into CI/CD doesn't sound like a great idea.
Yeah, no, especially with stuff like CodeCov attack, and Travis CI had a similar attack where like all environment variables were exposed. Like everyone's got to just go and roll everything at that point. It's like such a mess. So yeah.
Well, and it's one thing to say, okay, we got to go reset your password. Fine. There is a race. I mean, as soon as that happens, there's a race from people looking to use those credentials and you looking to not have them used by other than you. But the real problem, I think, is not the people who are paying attention. It's probably the maintainer who set up some project and hasn't touched it in a year and hasn't checked their email. They're just kind of not super engaged. That could stay open for a super long time in a bad way.
Exactly.
All right. Yeah. Package signing. Donald Stuff talked about package signing and said why package signing is not the holy grail. People just say it's a little bit like the 2FA stuff. Like if you just sign your packages to prove they come from you, everything is going to be fine unless the person just goes rogue. Like you can't protect from crazy. There was one of the packages that got messed up. I think it was on PyPI. That same person was arrested for like bomb making materials in New York.
I don't know about this.
I'll see if I can find the article. But it's like clearly that's not a well-functioning sort of person, and it doesn't matter if they sign the package if they just go bonkers,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's not the attack that we're trying to protect against with signing, but
so,
Donald.
What can signing help with, and what is it not going to help us with?
Well, yeah, that's great. Donald wrote this post that's kind of like canon at this point for why package signing is not the holy grail, but he's really talking about GPG. Why GPG signing is not the holy grail. And there's like there's good points in here, right? Like, so like you said, package signing doesn't protect against, an actual account compromise. If someone compromised your GPG key, like they can sign whatever they want. So, there's no protections there. And then there's other problems with GPG as well. Like there's UX and usability issues. There's issues with Web of Trust, like actually establishing, okay, great. Like you signed this thing, but how do I establish that the person that signed it is actually a person that I trust and not like someone's provided me with a malicious public key, right? Like how do you actually do that? And so, yeah, I think a lot of people
It's a
don't
little
know that.
equivalent to, sorry, it's a little equivalent to people saying, well, just check that it's HTTPS for the URL.
Right.
Like, well, that's not identity. That's just like encryption.
Yeah. You can still serve crap over HTTPS. Yeah. I think a lot of people also, they don't realize that like PyPI has supported uploading GPG signatures for like a very long time, still does, hasn't gone away, and nobody does it. It's just like, it's just not used. Nobody does it. It's too hard. Tooling doesn't work right, or it's just like not worth doing. So yeah, I think Donald's post is right in the context of a world, and this is written in 2013. So a world where like only GPG is the only signing feature or signing tooling that you have available. But that's not true anymore. And I'm really excited about this new tech called Sigstore, partly because I work with it. People on my team work on it. It's like really interesting technology. But Sigstore is essentially like a new way to sign things, and it's not necessarily based on long-lived, maintained keys. It actually uses ephemeral keys. Like when you sign something with Sigstore, you generate a public-private key pair, you sign it very quickly, and then you throw those away. Like you don't actually maintain them. They can't get leaked. They don't ever get written to disk. Like nothing. They don't exist. Yeah. So this is also
the chain of ownership of those keys. The keys like provided by some other trusted key or something that really is tied to you, something like that.
No.
It's
literally just a key that you generate out of thin air, you sign it, and then you throw it away. So the way that Sigstore works, which is it's also built on top of OIDC. So you have these identities, right? You have like your email, your Gmail account, your GitHub account, that kind of thing. And they all offer like essentially an online identity. You essentially sign with these identities instead. So like you sign into something like Gmail, sign into something like GitHub, you share this identity with a certificate authority that Sigstore runs, and this binds the identity to this like one-time ephemeral private public key pair that you generated. And then that certificate is published on a transparency log. So it's there forever. There's a record of everything that gets signed. But then like the thing that you have to like trust is not like some, however many digit long alphanumeric like public key ID. It's like an email address. It's like di@python.org. So you can like be pretty sure that someone hasn't, and someone can still lose access to that identity via like compromise of that account. But it's like it's much easier to use, sign, and maintain. And it's a little bit less likely that actual identity is going to get compromised.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Just stepping back a moment. Here's the one that I was thinking of. Sorry, it was NPM, not PyPI.
Oh.
NPM libraries, colors and fakers sabotaged and protest by maintainer, a person named Marek Squires, and followed up quickly from that. We have the resident of Queensholm suspected in bomb-making materials arrested, Mark Squires, and so on. So, like, this is what I was talking about when I'm saying, like, the no amount of signing or, 2FA is going to help against this. And it's just something, I mean, I think it's part of the deal. If you accept code from people, you got to vet that.
I've essentially like always said, PyPI makes no guarantees. You can't trust anything that's on it. You need to like take your own steps to learn and build trust in the things that are on there. We can give you some tools to help you do that, but like, essentially you're giving someone commit access to your project, your application, whatever. Like you're allowing them to introduce code into your project and run it alongside your application.
What are your thoughts on private hosted package systems like PyPI dev server or whatever, those where you can create the local ones and maybe even mirror stuff from PyPI?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to do like a really robust like auditing pipeline where you pull stuff from public PyPI, you spend some time looking at it, you maybe run it through some tests, and then you introduce it to your private server, that's a really good way to like insulate yourself from a couple different types of attacks, like dependency confusion attacks, typo squatting, that kind of thing. Like if you're pointing your install at a private server that just doesn't have any of that stuff on it because you have manually curated it, then yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good practice. And so like a lot of people like Artifactory, Google Cloud, Artifact Registry, all those things, like they're all sort of similar in that regard.
I guess related to that is if you automatically install the latest continuously, that maybe puts you at a higher level of risk than if you choose to upgrade at some point to a package, like pinning versus not pinning, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. We're getting pretty short on time here, Dustin. What else? What else can we cover? I know maybe pip audit or scorecard, or what do you want to focus on for a couple more minutes here?
Well, yeah, let me just quickly say that like Sigstore, we built a Python client, so you can pip install Sigstore and then sign, verify, do whatever from there. And I'm super excited to say that like the upcoming Python 3.11 release the releases are usually signed with GPG, but we're going to start signing it with Sigstore as well. The release maintainer.
Oh, nice.
Pablo.
Can it be signed with two things at once? I guess it can.
Yeah, multiple people can sign it. So we're just going to have the release manager sign it. But yeah, that's super exciting. So another like area that we've been working on a lot lately, I've been working on is around vulnerability auditing and remediation. So we have a new tool called Pip Audit. It's not part of Pip right now, and there's some discussion about whether it should be or not. But essentially, this is a tool that allows you to audit your local environment, your Docker container requirements file, whatever, for known vulnerabilities, not like unknown vulnerabilities, but stuff that's been known, reported, and either fixed or upgraded. So it'll tell you like essentially if it finds a CVE or something like that. But this also uses like a Python specific advisory database that we built that pairs with the open source vulnerability service. And it works pretty well. I'm pretty pleased with it. I would like encourage everyone to just like run it on their machine and see what vulnerabilities you have like lurking about right now. But also like integrate it into your CI pipeline, like run an audit, just make sure that, your application is not going to like have a vulnerability introduced into it. Pairs really nicely with like Dependabot and things like that as well. And like, I don't know. Yeah, there's a bunch of other stuff like working on Salsa. If you're not familiar with Salsa, it's essentially like a framework for thinking about how secure your build pipeline is when you're publishing artifacts. So if you're a maintainer, you might think about whether tampering is possible, that kind of thing. This is sort of a way just to sort of think about how good of a job the build pipeline is doing in that regard.
Yeah. Build pipelines are a little scary.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a huge value, but they're also, you could sneak stuff in without even actually changing the code of the original repo and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I saw this is managed by or like in collaboration with Trail of Bits, and also you're a maintainer. What's the origin story of Pip Audit?
Yeah. So Trail of Bits is a security consultancy. They've done a lot of work in the Python space and software security space for a long time now. Folks like William Woodruff were actually involved in like way back when implementing two-factor and some other stuff on PyPI. So my team, open source security team at Google, we've hired them as contractors to do some of this work and do some maintenance, build these open source projects, that kind of thing. So you'll see William and Alex and some other folks all over these projects because they've been working really hard to make them really useful and work really well and be really secure.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's maybe just round things out with the stuff on the PEP, various PEPs.
Oh yeah, so yeah, I've been
maybe the API. Yeah. Let's go through the PEPs real quick, then we'll probably have covered enough.
Yeah, I stuck my name on a couple PEPs recently. Yeah, I think most of these are, I've like provided some like minimal input into them. Can't claim that I authored them myself, but one I'm super excited about is PEP 621. So this is a way to do essentially static metadata for Python packages. So this includes source distributions, which means that like you don't have to use setup.py anymore. If you don't know why you don't need to use setup.py anymore, it's essentially arbitrary code execution at install time, which is super scary and it should not happen. So 621.
Pair that thought with this resident of Queens arrested for bomb making. Like,
yeah.
Do you want to have that person running arbitrary code on your machine? Probably no.
At install time
or in your production, right? In production.
Yeah, exactly. So I actually just saw, like, right before I joined this, I saw a tweet from Pragen that like Setup Tools has full support for this. There's a bunch of folks that have been working really hard on it. So yeah, it's essentially like you don't need to use setup.py anymore, which is really nice. And like a lot of tools have sort of converged on pyproject.toml as the sort of best standard for metadata and configuration. So like it's nice to see that convergence. Yeah, it's great. Shout out to like Brett. I think mostly led this PEP. He did an amazing job. And then
very cool.
PEP 691 is exciting as well. So PyPI has a couple different APIs. Most of them are not standardized. One of them that is standardized is the simple API, which is essentially just an HTML page. And tools like Pip.
It's kind of insane, but if you go to simple.
Oh, are you really going to do it? Yeah, this is going to blow up your browser for sure. Because like it essentially, yeah. So tools don't actually use this page; they use the individual pages for these projects. But yeah, I think tools like Pip essentially have to parse HTML to like interact with PyPI, and that it's not great. Like it used to work okay, it doesn't scale well now. So we're in the process of like standardizing a lot of our JSON APIs, and one of them that we sort of did, and Donald led this PEP with some input from Pragen and Cooper and myself. Essentially like the same data, same API, same files, everything that Pip needs that's not HTML. It's just JSON. So they can use standard library JSON parser to request and get this and do the stuff that Pip needs to do to be Pip.
Yeah, probably make it a little more efficient, easier for other people to consume, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
is that something that you encourage other applications to go mess with PyPI APIs, or is it's public, but we'd rather you don't mess with it? What are your thoughts?
Well, so I'd say like the stuff that we have standardized, definitely you can depend on it, right? Like it will continue to exist. And by standardizing it, we've said like this is what you should expect. And this, unless we change the standard, that's what it's going to continue to do. We have other APIs that existed before we were standardizing stuff. Like there's a legacy JSON API. There's this XML RPC API that's like such a nightmare to maintain. We've kept them running just because a lot of people use them. Like for example, Poetry uses this like kind of our unofficial JSON API. And yeah, I mean, there's times when we need to do stuff to that because it like isn't scaling right, or there's trade-offs that we need to make. And it's like, well, like we're probably going to have to break someone in order to like keep this afloat. But like with things like these standard APIs, like we've spent a lot of time designing them, playing them, standardize them. Like those are definitely 100% cool to integrate against.
Okay, fantastic. Traditionally on these PEPs, you'll see it's accepted and planned for this version of Python. This one doesn't have that, right? Because it just goes against the web app, right?
Yeah, this is a packaging PEP. So we use the same process as CPython for their Python enhancements, but yeah, this is about packaging, so it doesn't necessarily tie to an individual Python release.
You don't ship it to a binary that people get, right?
Well, in a way, we do. Like Pip, ships support for it in a binary. So, yeah. So, and it's implemented. Like this exists on PyPI now. Pip uses this now.
If I have the latest Pip on my machine and I pip install something or do Pip actions, which does it hit the old simple or does it hit this new one now?
If I'm remembering correctly, the support's been added to Pip. It might not. I think it's been released. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong. I'm not Pip maintainer, but yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay, cool. And we have one more to touch on.
Oh yeah, I mean, you only really care about this if you're like really working with PyPI, but we're gonna have a new. Like I said, we're standardizing all our APIs, so there's gonna be a new upload API. The existing upload API has a lot of problems. It's fairly old. It's essentially just a big post request with like a ton of metadata in it. So this should be a little bit better, and also enable things like draft releases where you can like publish something to PyPI that's in draft state. You can review it, practice installing it before you actually like publish it. And when it's in draft, it'll allow you to overwrite it, like do things that we don't actually
fix the problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Is this an alternative replacement or just another safety net compared to say like the test PyPI versus production PyPI?
You mean like the draft stuff? Yeah, I think it'd be
like would stuff automatically upload and draft and you got to flip it so that you don't accidentally publish something that's not ready, or because you forgot to use the test PyPI?
Yeah, test PyPI is kind of weird because like it actually existed to be our our test environment for PyPI, like because we didn't have a great test suite with the old PyPI, and now it sort of hangs around as like a playground sandbox. Like do what you
Yeah.
want, we don't care. But yeah, some people do like have it in their production, in their like release flow, like upload here first, make sure that it works, and then like go to. So I think this will be a better use case and sort of consolidate folks to use PyPI for everything, and we can eventually shut down test PyPI because yeah, it's not as useful as it could be.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I think that's probably all the time we got to talk about this. We could go on and on. We only touched on some of the stuff that we're thinking about talking about. But before we're done, maybe answer the final two questions.
Yeah. So
If,
you want to ask?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
My favorite editor.
If you're going to write some code, what editor do you use?
Yeah, I do almost everything in VI and have since I sort of started doing any kind of development work. That said, I kind of try to do as much as I can in the browser, in the like GitHub UI. I hit speed bumps there. Sometimes it can't be quite as fast, but like for little stuff, I kind of like seeing what I can do there.
Yeah, right on. Do you ever press the dot in GitHub?
Yeah, all the time. Love the dot.
Yeah, the dot converts it to like a hosted VS Code, basically.
Yep.
And then package you want to give a shout out
to? So my biased answer to this is check out the SigStore package on PyPI and the pip-audit package. Those are both stuff that I've been working on, my team has been working on, and I'm really proud of the way that they work, and we're going to be working on integrating those into like more use cases, more developer patterns. Check them out, like try them out. Yeah. I'd love to get feedback
fantastic.
on them.
And they seem to fill like a super important hole that to sort of backfill some of the security and supply chain stability and so on.
Yep. And then I think my unbiased answer, I did want to give a shout out to the pip-tools project on PyPI. That's maintained by the Jazzband team. So that's just like a roving, revolving door of maintainers, but they do a good job keeping it up and running. And it satisfies this really, I think, important use case that a lot of people don't do with their Python dependencies, which is essentially allows you to compile your dependencies into a requirements file that has all the versions pinned, all the sub dependencies there, hashes, which is like, please like use pips hash checker, hash all your dependencies. It definitely protects you against another whole class of attacks. But yeah, pip-tools is great for that. I would love a future where that was part of pip. I don't know if that's going to exist or not, up to the maintainers, but yeah, it's super cool.
I have switched to using pip-tools for all of my packages, and I love it. It's fantastic.
Nice. Yeah, me too. We use it for PyPI. We use it for a bunch of other stuff. Yeah.
Indeed. All right. Final call to action. People want to get more involved, maybe make their things more secure.
Yeah. I'd say call to action is go to pypi.org/security-key-giveaway. See if you're eligible as a critical maintainer for security keys. If not, please just turn on 2FA anyway while you're there. As a maintainer, I'd really appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, keep your eye on the security space. I think like there's a lot of interesting stuff happening, a lot of focus, a lot of resources going into it right now. It's a good time to like try and adopt some additional security, both to protect yourself, your users, everything. So
yeah, I definitely second that. Dustin, thanks so much for coming and sharing all this. This has been great to talk about, get an insight and some of the ideas and thoughts behind all these decisions. It's great.
Yeah, for sure, Michael. It's always really great to talk to you. So glad to be here.
Yeah, you too. Thanks again. See ya.
Yeah, see ya.